All right. So, did we get to Arlington in there?
Yeah, let's start there. We talked about General Lee's. We talked about how that's Lee's plantation.
It is Lee's plantation, the cemetery, very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I thought you were talking about like someone that wanted to Lee's plantation.
Meigs was the Adjutant General of the United States Army. And General Meigs, M-E-I-G-S. You don't need to know.
Oh.
I mean, I won't make you know that for the test, you know. But what he did for Arlington is that he wanted a he could pick the spot where the new United States National Cemetery would be. So this was going to be done originally by the United States Army. Now it's taken care of by the Department of the Interior and the Park Service, but the U.S. government. And they confiscated Lee's plantation because Virginia left the Union, so they did it as part of the effort to end the rebellion. Has anyone been there? Have I did I ask this? Yeah. Go. If you get a chance, I know you got to go to D.C. and there's 1,000 things to see in D.C. But Arlington is really amazing. And if you're in Arlington, if you stand right about here, you can look all the way down the mall. See how the Lincoln Memorial, you see the World War II Memorial, Washington Monument. You get the right angle and see the Capitol in the very back. It's an incredible view. Yeah.
How often do they do the like switch guards?
Was it 3 times a day? And when I was there the very first time, they had a whole ceremony where they had the entire 3rd Old Guard, which is the regiment that guards it, because it was the ceremony for the anniversary of the Army. So I just happened to be there. And so instead of just the change of the guard, it was they had 1,000 men and women march out. It was kind of, no idea, just happened to be there. Copying the French, everybody copies the French. But you know what? Crepes are pretty darn good. Who's with me on that? You probably like horseradish, don't you? All right, so, let's get back to this then. What was Sherman's idea to take the war to the people?
Total war.
Yeah, total war. And we will get to total war more when we get to World War I. If once it started going to war after the Civil War and technology became more advanced and the weapons became more horrible, if you're committing total war and attacking their civilians, what's your enemy doing to you? They're going to try to do the same thing and try to engineer a revolt. Virtually every monstrous thing you can think of in the 20th century will come out of total war through today. In fact, virtually not. That's hard to come up with anything that didn't involve total war. Finding an enemy that's trying to undermine you, looking for enemies within that might be traitors within a war, that you're fighting the enemy to the finish. 1942, after Germany conquered, I'll show you right here, Germany conquered Poland, and this part of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, here, as an act of total war in 1942, they initiated the final solution, the Holocaust, as an enemy. There were hardly any Jews in Germany when the war began. It was a war, horrific, awful, unimaginably horrible, but they justified it through the logic of total war. That's how they justified it. So, what was it called with the Atlanta to Savannah? What was that called? Yeah. And who saved the Union? Jefferson Davis. He put in Hood as commander. So let's go to finish up right here. A few things really quick then. Baby, where's the mouse? So, Lincoln's second inaugural. This is March 1865. And in it was very conciliatory. In fact, one of the most famous was malice towards none and charity to all. He implied healing and reconciliation. And people, especially after the war, especially Southerners and people to this day would say, he promised to let us in with reconciliation. But he also made it very clear that there will be a change in the South. There will be Reconstruction. And the old power struggle will remain. But I put a question mark there because we don't know what he was planning. he'd be dead a little bit more than a month after this, which is so weird to think about. Can you see him give the speech? It was very uncomfortable. Right there. There's the podium. Not that many people were there. There were guards all over. They were fearful of assassination. No one really thought the president would be in danger of assassination, except at a time of rebellion. I know what's coming. If you looked ahead in history, this would be a problem down the road. So, where's my mouse? So that's the last picture taken of Lincoln just after the inauguration. Isn't that a good picture? I like that one. They don't use it that much, but he aged 1,000 years right there. You can just see him before and after. Well, on the night of the 2nd and 3rd of 1865, the Confederacy finally collapsed. The army was already falling apart. There were hundreds of men deserting every night. They were running out of food. The main diet for the defenders at Petersburg, who were literally walking scarecrows, they called them, or walking skeletons, their diet more and more was becoming a bread, kind of a gooey bread made out of ground up corn cobs and sawdust. It would fill you up. This hunger hurts so bad, and it fills you up. So there's something there, but you can imagine what sawdust would do to your stomach and intestine. You can imagine. It was awful. And so they just couldn't do it anymore. And everybody knew the war was over. Jefferson Davis even proposed arming slaves to have them fight for slavery, which of course went nowhere. 2 weeks before the Confederacy collapsed, Jefferson Davis proposed ending slavery to try to get Britain to enter the war, which shows you how desperate it was and almost just a farce by them. So when Meade's army finally cut off that last rail link, the line was untenable, and they had to pull out of the Petersburg lines. And when they pulled out of they pulled out so hastily, a number of the dead and wounded were left. That is a dead Confederate soldier. You can see how skinny he is, and look how, does he look really young? I think he's your age. That's what he looks like to me. But of course, he's so gaunt. He also looks like he's aged 1,000 years and young. That's what it looks like to me. So, the government of Richmond had to pull out then too. And a hasty pullout where they tried to burn a bunch of records that they couldn't take with them. I mean, literally just start running away that night. And in the process, they accidentally burned Richmond down, the Confederacy, as they left. They hit an ammunition dump and see all the cannonballs? They exploded when the gunpowder went, so there were cannonballs all over. Lincoln, who was nearby, knowing the end was near, could not wait. And the night of the 3rd, he rode in with just an escort of 12 cavalrymen. And they warned him, you can't come in, it's so dangerous. But he couldn't wait, so he stayed the 3rd and the 4th. And 2 interesting things about it. His cavalrymen, his cavalry escort, were former slaves. It just happened to be with what they called colored regiment. And he was met by thousands of weeping, crying, singing former slaves. There's a really popular song at this time called Kingdom Coming, and it was about basically the Union Army freeing slaves. And they were singing that, and Lincoln sang with them, and it really moved him and talked about this. And he said, this is something like the war was worth it. I will never forget this. He had 10 days left. And so, Lee could not quit, and he began to retreat westward. Here's Petersburg, just as fast as they could go, trying to get to Lynchburg, where there's a rail cars with food, and they could get to the mountains. He didn't know what to do. He just couldn't quit fighting. Union Army in hot pursuit. There'd be a couple sharp fights, and the Confederate Army, literally, the men couldn't march. They were so starving, and so thousands just collapsed. They couldn't go. Finally, the Confederates were cut off on the 8th and the 9th of April by cavalry under the youngest major general in the United States Army, George Armstrong Custer, who had been promoted. He was a very fine cavalry commander in the Civil War. They cut him off, and Lee realized it was over and sent word he's ready to swear. So on April 9th, they met at Appomattox Courthouse, at Wilmer McLean's courthouse, the same man who fled the Manassas after the first Battle of Bull Run. They met at his parlor. Why the big house? Big house. Lee showed up in his full-dress military uniform. Grant showed up in a mud-speckled uniform because he was riding so hard. And when they got there, here's a very stylized painting of it. It wasn't quite like this, but there's Lee and Grant. And Grant tried to make small talk at first, but you can imagine Lee was crushed at this time. Grant said something to the effect of, "I remember you from the Mexican War, from Chapultepec." And Lee responded with, "I don't remember you." Now, that's a pretty snippy answer, but you can, then Grant got mad. And then Grant remembered, "Oh, I won. Everything's okay." He gave very lenient terms. All the Confederate Army had to do is give up their weapons and they could go home. They were paroled. And also the Union Army provided them with food. They were starving. Some would argue he gave too lenient terms, but what are you going to do? Line them up and shoot them? I mean, it's really, that's, Grant decided it was over. There was a formal ceremony. This is a very obviously kind of stylized painting. The next day of the Confederacy surrendered, and the man Grant chose to accept the surrender was Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, the guy whose 20th Maine held Little Round Top, one of the heroes of the Battle of Gettysburg. Chamberlain was horribly wounded in one of the first charges at Petersburg, took 2 musket balls in the belly, survived somehow. He was left for dead, given the Congressional Medal of Honor, which was created during the war as, at least at first, the highest award for bravery. Then it would become just a medal. Now it's back to the highest award for bravery. He survived. So he finished the war as a major general. He was the one they chose because of the Little Round Top. After the war, he would be a 4-time governor of Maine. At Amherst College, he would teach every subject but math, and would go to every reunion, including that last one in 1913, even though he was getting quite ill, and finally die of those wounds he got back in 1864. He would die at the end of 1913. Kind of an amazing guy. He was like a towering figure. Union veterans created this group called the Grand Army of the Republic, and they would march and have these ceremonies. And Chamberlain was one of the towering figures of it. So, that's the inauguration again. Now, you can't really make them out, but there are a few guys in here. Getting George Atzerodt is right about here. There's a guy right about here. It's hard to see because it's in the shadows, but he's wearing a silk top hat. He's a very famous actor. Who? John Wilkes Booth. The same. He was an actor. John W. No. And he was at John Brown's execution as part of the Richmond Grays, a militia unit. And he was thinking about shooting Lincoln at that inauguration. But after Lee surrendered, he decided that he was going to kill Abraham Lincoln. And Booth would lead a conspiracy to kill Lincoln. Now, his thought was a combination of revenge and maybe destabilize the government, because the Confederacy is still fighting. There are still soldiers. I'm not going to talk about these last battles, but the last battle is going to be the end of May of 1865 in Texas. Ironically, it's a small cavalry clash that the Confederates won. It's one of those weird little things that happen. But the big thing is revenge. What's a conspiracy? A what? Yeah, plot or plan to commit a crime by 2 or more people. It's a plan or an actual crime by 2 or more people. Everyone got that? That's a conspiracy. So it's not one person acting alone, it's 2 or more. Now, it's the plot. If they would have got together and said, and seriously planned to assassinate the president, which they already did. They did it and they were at the inauguration. He had a Derringer, a small little handgun, hidden. That's a crime. If you seriously plot to commit a crime, that's a conspiracy, even if you don't commit the crime. So don't joke about robbing the bank. Okay, it's got to be serious, obviously. But this is the full-fledged conspiracy. A conspiracy theory, which is now kind of endemic in American society today, is the idea that there is some kind of conspiracy that's hidden from the public that might involve people with great power who committed this crime. But a conspiracy is simply a crime committed by more than one person. So he knew Lincoln was going to go watch a very popular play called My American Cousin. It was a comedy. I should add, we would not find it funny at all today. Comedy is very much in the time. You know, what's funny today probably won't be funny 20 years from now. It doesn't age very well. It's just one of those things. So things that I thought was hilarious when I was in high school back in the 1920s, I don't find as funny today mostly. And you'll be the same way. Same way with age, you know, things that I find funny, you don't necessarily find funny, vice versa. Comedy just is very much for the age. But people loved it. Lincoln went, he was really excited. And Ulysses S. Grant was going to go with him. Grant and his wife. Grant was back in Washington, D.C. after Lee surrendered. And whose plan was to shoot them both. But Grant really, really, really didn't want to go. So Grant's wife acted like she was sick, so he had to stay home. He was replaced by one of his age, Major Jonathan Rathbone, and they went to it. I didn't turn the screen yet. They went to the play here. Ford's Theater, it's still there. They still have plays there. And it's also run by the National Park Service because it's a historical monument. There's a great museum in the basement. If you get to Washington, D.C., has anyone been there? Yeah, come. It's really cool. Ford's Theater is neat. When I was there, they were actually playing My American Cousin. But the day we were there, they weren't having the play, they were just getting set up. The next day they were doing the play. Kind of wanted to go, even though I knew I probably wouldn't find it funny at all. But we were going to be out of town. But we got to go on the stage. Did you go in?
I went to is it the house across where
Yeah.
he was taken?
Yeah, Willard House.
Okay. That's what
Did you went too?
I didn't know.
Oh, okay. And were you able to go onto the stage? And yeah, so I couldn't go on the stage, or I could go on the stage, but I couldn't watch a play. My American Cousin, he loved it. Lincoln was laughing his head off. Booth, though, is a famous author. I know, it's just really, once I said that, that's a weird way to say it. Moving on, Booth's a famous actor. And so he could walk around the backstage, and people didn't really check him. And there really weren't that many guards there. There was one guard. You had a balcony seat. There was a painting of it. And there was a guard at the door. But intermission, though, that guard, just a private in the Army, thought he was bored out of his skull. So he ran to a nearby bar and started drinking. And he hadn't got back yet. Booth walked up, and really he wasn't sure what he was going to do, but there was a guard. The guard was gone. So he just walked into the door. Or in fact, he waited outside the door until there was a laugh line. When everybody was laughing, at that moment there would be kind of hide him opening the door. And so Lincoln was laughing when he walked in, pulled out the Derringer, which is a small handgun with a little black powder charge, so the bullet doesn't move very fast, and shot him from just a few feet away right here. Rathbone jumped up to try to stop him. Booth slashed him with his knife and then jumped on the stage. Actors had to be acrobats. So he was going to make this dramatic kind of flourish and jump onto the stage and make a comment, and actually had planned for maybe a little, almost like a dance almost to do in triumph. But his foot hit, and that's why they show it here, hit the bunting, and he landed awkwardly and shattered his ankle. compound fractured bones. It was awful. He still got up and said, "Sic temper tyrannis." Huh? Yeah. So basically, it's thus happens to tyrants, death to tyrants. And he stumbled off the stage. An army surgeon was there who had been a battlefield surgeon, and they had procedures of what to do. If you would add his kit, they had these long brass prods that they would stick into bullet holes. I know it sounds awful, but it's fun for before lunch. And they would stick it in and try to find where the bullet is. He didn't have that. But the idea was, get that bullet, if you get it out as quick as possible. The bullet has a bunch of stuff on it and it leads to more infection. He didn't have that. He had his finger. And he stuck his finger in it. But when he pulled it out, it opened up all the blood vessels. He might have had a chance, maybe, to live. Today, a much better chance, but even then, might have had a chance. No chance. Now, looking back, yes, he made a mistake, but he did exactly what they were trained to do. And for a normal wound, that would have been what he was supposed to do. So Lincoln, dying, they brought him across the street to a boarding house. Well, the assassination, the conspiracy had two other attempts. Lewis Powell was going to kill the Secretary of State, William Seward. He attacked him with a knife and a pistol, ended up slashing his face. The pistol didn't go off, but Seward fought him off, even though a big hunk of his cheek was cut. And they're kind of laying like a flat. George Atzerodt, right here, was supposed to shoot President Johnson, but he got nervous and went to a bar instead. So Johnson survived. Grant, of course, wasn't there. Lincoln was brought over to Willard House, which is also part of the Park Service today. So the Park Service runs this. And they laid him on a bed in this boarding house. The bed was not big enough for him, so it had to be laid diagonally. He never regained consciousness. A couple of times they said his eyes lightened up, but he never spoke. And that would be in Harper's Magazine. In the morning, he died. If you go there today, it's as close as they can to the way it was when they moved the body out. You remember that?
No, I was young.
You were young. Did you go over there?
I never went.
So, the blood's still there. It's black with his blood, the sheets. Now, when I first heard that, I was like, oh God, this is going to be really gross. It's actually, it fits. It works. It's like, it's one of those things, oh, I'm glad they left it the way it was. Now it's just black. It's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Atzerodt and Powell.
So
George Atzerodt was going to kill the vice president.
Oh.
Yeah.
He was the second guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Lewis Powell was going to kill the Secretary of State. There's Powell. Powell was kind of inept. Some of the conspirators were very sharp, but these two, they were guys he could manipulate to get him to do it. Nobody else really wanted to kill him. Booth was such a zealot that he did it. So, when the biggest manhunts in history began, to hunt him down, Surratt Tavern was a boarding house where the plans were made, which will implicate Mary Surratt, the owner of the boarding house. Her son was part of the conspiracy. Dr. Howard Mudd was the a surgeon who set his leg, but they couldn't really do much for it because it was so shattered so badly. So he too now is part of the conspiracy. Eventually they would be caught at Garrett's farm. They would hold out for 2 days in a barn until it caught fire and Booth was shot by cavalrymen during the fighting camp. The rest of the conspirators would be tried and 5 would be condemned to death, including Mary Surratt, whose only crime appears to have been she owned the boarding house and her son was part of it. But there was such an anger, a desire for revenge, they executed her too. This has 4 of them being executed. This is right after the trap door went. That's Mary Surratt. Yeah, General Hooker, the same general from the Battle of Chancellorsville, the one who clapped 3 times, and then they pulled the trigger. So, President Johnson is now president. Nobody expected this. Yes, I know they had the Union Party, but what party is Johnson? He's, more importantly, a Southern Democrat. And Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats were different, and they're going to become really different in the next century. Until the Southern Democrats will almost all become Republicans, but that's coming in the 1960s and 70s. But Johnson was so terrified that he was going to be president. I mean, terrified. And this is going to be a bad omen for his entire administration. It was suggested by the Secretary of Navy, Gideon Welles, and this is so stupid, but have a drink of whiskey, that will calm you down. He proceeded to drink an entire bottle of whiskey and then was sworn in. He could hardly stand up and say the words to be sworn in. That gives you an idea. That's a perfect omen for his administration. It's one of the tragedies of the United States, in a way, that before the Civil War and right after the Civil War, we're going to have some of the worst presidents in American history. Pierce, Buchanan, and Johnson. Fortunately, during the war, we had one of the best, but it seems almost like it's kind of the luck of the draw. And so there's Johnson. Oh, he'll also be the last president without facial hair until Woodrow Wilson. I know you're wondering. The last major Confederate army scraped together in North Carolina, once again under Joseph E. Johnston, would surrender to Sherman in North Carolina. In fact, the last major battle would be a week after Lincoln was assassinated. And Johnston and Sherman were actually friends before the war, become friends afterwards. And Sherman, who would later on become the commander of the United States Army, and he would die in 1889. One of his pallbearers was Joseph E. Johnston. And it was March of 1889, wet, sleeting, really cold day in Washington, D.C. for his funeral. And Johnston was a pallbearer. And didn't wear his hat in respect for his friend. And of course, you know what's going to happen. Got cold, turned into pneumonia. So, I'll say there's another pleasant story, but it's interesting how they both went together. Davis would be captured a couple weeks after that. He put on a shawl to try to hide from cavalry. And so they showed you how misogynistic the United States was, and for a long time. They immediately said he tried to dress up as a woman, therefore trying to hide as a woman. But he would be captured, $360,000 reward for him. And we're talking, it's hard to really put that into terms, but $40 to $50 million today? That's more than I make in a month. Okay, he would be jailed, and there would never be a trial for treason. And this would be kind of an example of what's going to happen to all the former Confederates. I mean, the most obvious traitor, who was a senator who swore oath to the United States, graduate of West Point, betrayed his country, became its president. They held him for 2 months, or sorry, for 2 years, and there was a real talk about trial. They talked about it. He's obviously an insurrectionist, obviously a traitor, but the Johnson administration slow-walked it, and after 2 years, no trial. And they just let him go. Yeah, president of the Confederacy. And after the war ended, in the South, they hated Jefferson Davis almost as much as they hated Abraham Lincoln. They blamed him for losing the war. But 20 years later, Davis by then had become one of the great martyrs for the lost cause of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. He would write a biography where he would try to lay out that he was just fighting a noble fight. What about the rest of the former Confederates? There was a cry from the very beginning, we're going to hang every cursed rebel, every traitor. You notice I put the line through there. Nothing like that happened. Here is a little thing, basically a little playbill handed out about hanging Jefferson Davis. Only one Confederate officer would be tried for treason, actually tried for this new thing called a war crime. Henry Wirz was the commandant of the brutal Andersonville prison. After 1864, they quit prisoner exchanges, and the Confederacy didn't have the food or resources to hold prisoners. And so Andersonville prison was an incomprehensible hellhole for U.S. prisoners. The Confederates couldn't afford to feed them. Wirz was the commandant who had been wounded a number of times. He could hardly function. He was incompetent, and thousands of Union prisoners died. Now, I should add, Union prisoners for Confederate POWs were almost as bad. But the Union won. He would be executed. No other Confederate soldier would be arrested for treason. And in 1868, right before Johnson left office, he gave a general amnesty to every Confederate. Amnesty means what? Say it again.
Blanket pardon.
Yeah, blanket pardon for all their crimes. Everyone. Now, it would be difficult for some to move in office, but you're going to have former Confederates join the U.S. Army again. One of the most prominent commanders of the United States Army during the Spanish-American War was a Confederate cavalry leader. And yes, I know that's over 30 years later, but still. So, unification. Yes, the countries can be unified, but how can we forgive? And can you forgive this kind of slaughter started by a rebellion of people betraying their country? So, this was always the established number. By the way, it's very exact, even though they weren't exact. You notice there's more northern death. About half died of disease because camp life was so horrific. But they wouldn't have been in those situations without the war, so they count as a battle death, obviously. But almost 1 million people died. The population of the country dropped 1 million people. We now think it's significantly more. And 1 out of every 10 men in the United States died. 1 out of 3 in the Confederacy. And so 1 out of 3 white, remember, slaves, despite Jefferson Davis couldn't fight. They kept track of the excess deaths. They do that in the census. They keep track of death to this day. And so they know if there's going to be an unusually high numbers of deaths, which they give the weird name excess deaths. They know when something is going on. That is why almost certainly in 2020, 2022, the excess deaths went out of the world in those years, and now they're dropping back to normal. And so the number of people who died of COVID is probably significantly higher than the official numbers, because the excess deaths were so high. Same thing in Europe.
Is it 1 out of every 10 people work in one out of
In the United States.
just in general?
Yeah.
Both working sides?
Mm-hmm. So, thus begins Reconstruction. Now, I know you have the notes, so I'm going to talk about this really quick, but I got to get those back. I didn't get those back. Let's get this really quick. I love the death row, the treason. Yeah, there's a lot of talk. We're going to hang them all. Then when the war ended, do we really want to hang them all? I mean, that's a tough one. What do you do after a civil war? No country has figured that one out. So, it is the political and economic integration. They got to bring it back to the Union. But the most important thing is that planter class. That planter class has got to be removed from power. Destroy the slaveholders' power. And the thing about it is they thought it'd be relatively easy because the slaveholders lost probably 60% of their wealth overnight. There's a certain amendment that ended 60% of their wealth. What amendment? The 13th, combined with the Emancipation Proclamation, ended that. And so there's got to be a change in the system. Did that happen, by the way? Did the former slaveholders lose their power? For the most part, no. With the aid, ironically, of a man who despised them. Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson remained loyal because he hated the slaveholders, despised those rich elite that got him in the war. But he became so angry at Republicans who wanted Reconstruction that he allied with his enemies. The enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. And it was. I put down noble because I think it was. I am biased towards equal rights. You know, everyone is biased. I'm very much biased this one. I'm saying it's noble. And one thing, everybody is biased. If somebody says they're not biased, what should you do? What?
I said I was kidding. Okay.
Yeah. Never trust anybody who says they're unbiased. Anybody who says they're unbiased is probably the most biased person you ever meet. Just something. I've been around a while. I figured that one out. There's two types of Reconstruction: presidential and congressional. This sometimes called radical Reconstruction. I always find that fascinating. Radical Reconstruction is saying that men should have equal rights. That's radical. Not men and women, just men. That's crazy radical. In a way it was, and obviously in a way it wasn't. You have to have empathy and understand where they're coming from in 1867. But that doesn't mean you can't look back and say, hey, you're forgetting 49% of the population. Binoculars? All right, so down to 25. You guys did very well on this. A few places had to take some points off here and there, but I thought people did really well on this. Okay. One thing, I gotta show everyone this. Some people did this. On the back, I put down election of 1868, I put R and D. And that's for you to put down the candidates. Did I give you two? Oh, thank you. I put down R and D, and you're supposed to put down, like for 1868, the Republicans Grant, the Democrats Seymour, who ran for president. I had a few people put down R, and they wrote out Republican. I know, big deal, but it made me laugh. That's a 5. That's a 5. Yeah. And I'm gonna fill in a few of the blanks of Reconstruction. Oh, everybody. What did free slaves receive after the war? Nothing but their freedom. Nothing but their freedom. Nothing. It's actually kind of shocking to think about it.
Oh my God, I said so.
It's a 5.
Food. Is this 5?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Somebody I don't have it, please get it to me as quickly as possible. You still get a few points. The quiz, I'm not kidding, it'll be like 8 questions. It's going to take it no more than. Have a good day, everybody. Right when you find work. Boy, see?
You should. You would be a great. You could be very good. You need to be working on it. And there's Yeah, for what?
You might end up in this one, but.
Yo, did you know that bigger than I did actually.
It's
How are those math worksheets going?
Same.
How are those math worksheets going? So enough more time.
See ya. Wait a minute, Mason, what are you doing? What's your
I
notes?
don't need them.
You know all
I
that?
know all that.
He's wild. I wrote it.
He knows everything.
Wait, but don't wad it up.
Don't want it up? All right.
See you Monday. Oh, you're doing a strategic bombing. It's, we can talk about planes and bombing.
Cool.
And so you and Evelyn will do that, so basically focus one person on like the British, one person on the American bombing.
We'll show so far.
No.
There's two.
I wanted to do bombing anyways.
Huh?
I said I wanted to do the bombing anyways.
You did really?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect, good, yeah. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
All right, people, we got work to do. After all we did. Pretty tricky. Graduate, you got to be to catch the frisbee. That's the rules now. Yes, nothing else matters, but.
What about the rug?
The rug is more important. By the way, have you guys noticed the rug?
Bro, maybe. I'm having a great.
Rug is here. Yeah, I know.
No,
I'm right here.
you man,
You're back.
I don't know.
That's long. That's back.
Yes.
I think we get, yeah, I think we get 80 minutes. How long do we get for like the final? Like how long is each final?
Top line, bottom line. And a lot of it's uphill, so pretty good shape. Anything else? Good, good. Yeah, I don't know how long the final. I really can't remember. I think it's like an hour and a half. I know I have the schedule somewhere. You know, but I think it's like an hour.
I thought it was like double the normal period time.
Yeah, so.
I think hour and a half.
It's like an hour.
Yeah, hours.
Yeah. That's whatever. I mean, you have more than enough time.
No, mostly soy part of the back.
Yeah, we snacked on the carrot sticks.
Seal.
What is this?
You're gonna have to
Run like you win. You got 30 seconds. Go. Yeah, but don't.
You said Friday.
We're doing it.
No, it doesn't. I got
What's this?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
his signature is worse than mine. I didn't think that was possible. Yeah.
Do you recognize the name Fidel Castro? He was the dairy dictator I was telling you about. He apparently built a giant complex.
Or it's just what?
I
Oh yeah, he adored ice. Yeah.
I am baffled because apparently he'd be like 16 tons of ice cream after.
Makes sense. I knew he liked ice cream. But we'll get to Fidel Castro. Oh yeah. All right, so.
That was the only good
That's nice. I just eat bowls of chicken. All right, so first off, next Wednesday you have extra credit. You have an opportunity for extra credit on the dress-up day. If you go on Teams, I went through and made something beautiful for all of you.
Yeah, can I borrow your,
Can I do Lincoln because of my?
So,
I know you didn't say Lincoln before, but can I be an exception even?
No, you can be John Brown.
That was my second one. John Brown.
Oh.
Well,
Yeah, John Brown was about, 6 foot tall. That's pretty tall. All right, so here we go. Extra credit.